Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call. I'm going to move quickly through today's call. We will not be doing a full call, although I do have some information I do want to share with you. I've been on a variety of calls all week. I've been on calls, several calls today. There's a call I'd like to be on right now, but we have to get together once a week and discuss the situation. There are about a dozen or so of our clients that I still need to return calls. I've been contacted by them, and I will get to them certainly, if not today, by the close of this week. There's a lot going on, and so I'm going to have to move quickly through this call. I suggest those of you calling in for the first time go to our call of last week, December 1st, because in addition to an outline of where I think we're going with regard to the reinstitution of the dinar, there's an explanation of our turnkey program, which is both pre and post RV, and then there's a nice Q&A in there. So I suggest you go there. The best place to go, because YouTube is giving us a little bit of jazz. Evidently, true to form, they don't like the truth, and so they're censoring individuals that are saying things that they don't want disseminated to the general public. So we're doing the best to circumvent that. We may be up on YouTube, but if we are not, you can go to Trusts with an S, unlimitedllc.com. You can then click Learn More. You would then click Conference Calls, and then you can select whatever date or dates you wish to listen to. So if YouTube is going to, do the silly stuff, then you can go directly to our website to get the information. Although I have been told that we are back up on YouTube, I frankly haven't had time to track that down. That's not in my list of things that I need to get done. So let's get into a little bit of the information that I'd like to. Let's start talking a little bit about the situation in Iraq. First, by way of disclaimer, Trusts Unlimited is not the purveyor of the dinar and these other currencies. We're not advocating either the sale or purchase of these currencies, but as rather substantial currency holders ourselves, we're sharing with you the information we believe to be relevant. Of course, the most relevant piece of information to be a window for the potential reinstitution of the dinar, and we're in the same place as we've been for the last couple of weeks. It literally could happen at any time, but it's looking more and more like it's going to happen in January. And frankly, from my perspective, I want it in January. We've discussed this a number of times. You never want to see the revaluation of a currency in a program rate in the last month of any given quarter. That is because taxes on the gain from that increased appreciation would be due on the 15th day of the first month of the next quarter. That does not give us time to compel the IRS to confirm Section 98082, which is the tax implications of an exchange done outside of an irrevocable trust, and Section 643B, which states that the exchange done within an irrevocable trust is tax deferred. There's also the issue of the timing of the exchange. So there's no way I want to see, not only because of the holidays, no way do I want to see an exchange in December. I want to see the exchange or the increase in value and the subsequent exchange by us in January, because that means whatever the taxes are will not be due until April 15th. That means we will be able to compel the IRS to confirm for us in writing Sections 98082 and 643B. It's important we get confirmation, even though in our view the language of those two codes is clear, because this is a substantial transaction. It's probably the largest transaction in your life, and we do not want to have any confusion from the IRS. The other issue, of course, is the timing of the exchange. We don't know if it's going to come out at a low float and quickly go to an equilibrium price, and I'll discuss that price. But even if it were to come out at the equilibrium price, which again I'm going to discuss in a moment, if we look at the past, currencies have appreciated substantially above the equilibrium price initially. That's because when a currency comes out of a program rate and is reestablished at an equilibrium price, there's something called velocity. Velocity isn't the inherent or intrinsic increase in the value of an asset. Velocity is an artificial increase because of a lot of money flowing to that asset. Now, with the Kuwaiti dinar as example, the Kuwaiti dinar revalued, I believe it was $3.42. But it went up over $7 quickly, and then quickly thereafter, within a matter of weeks, dropped back down to the equilibrium price. So we want to be able to take advantage to some extent to the velocity as well as the return to an equilibrium price. And again, with the revaluation in January, that gives us until April to make decisions like that. So that's the situation there. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Iraq, because we're seeing a glide path to a reinstitution. The pending budget for 2022 has a presumptive rate in it. The presumptive rate is based on the payout of the reparations to Kuwait. The CBI made a payment of $1.47 trillion US dollars to Kuwait as payment, a tranche for the reparations, but they had an equivalency in there of 0.4 trillion IQD, dinar. Well, if you do the math, that means that 0.4 trillion dinar against 1.47 trillion USD gives us a price of $3.67. So that's a pretty good indication of what the CBI expects the reinstated rate to be. In addition, the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the CBI have stated that the budget and the new exchange rate should go hand in hand. Now, let's assume for the sake of discussion, because it's happened in the past, that that's not what happens. They end up passing the budget, but they don't do the exchange rate right away. If you will recall, in order to try to get the exchange rate done in the past, the government declined to make payments at the program rate with the hopes that they could get the exchange rate completed. They didn't get that done for a lot of technical reasons, one having to do with money supply and then the other one having to do with pushback from the corrupt politicians that were making a lot of money at the status quo. So even if the rate of 367, assuming that's about where we'll be, even if that doesn't come out initially, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It might simply mean that they just haven't aligned the stars to get that done. Although I'm hopeful that this time it's all going to get done at the same time, the passage of the budget and the CBI cooperating with the rate approximately $3.67. We also know that the education program regarding the lower denoms and what's going on with the ATMs is continuing, and that's something that needed to happen. We also know that Kazemi is continuing to implement the white paper reforms, which are critical not only to reforming the economy, but in order to be Article 8 compliant with the UN. We also know that the Supreme Court has ratified the election. We know that the Sadrist coalition has won control of the parliament. We know that Sadr and Kazemi have met to discuss formation of the new government. And lastly, we know that central banks across the world, beyond the Middle East, are now in direct communication with the CBI, most notably the Bank of England, and they've made a statement that they're interested in establishing banks within Iraq. Now, this is important because if they were to go into Iraq at the program rate, they would only be transacting for profit using the U.S. dollar as their reserve currency. But that could be the case in any country. The only reason they would want to go into Iraq is because they either know or anticipate the reinstatement of the dinar, so that they'll be able to transact, the citizens of Iraq, they're going to be able to transact at the higher rate. Many of these citizens who have been distrustful of the banks in the past have been hoarding the provisional currency. Now, even though the 3 zeros are gone for the citizen, the fact of the matter is the provisional currency, along with the new lower denoms, are going to be worth substantially more, so they're going to want to re-enter the banking system, and London, along with other countries, is interested in participating in the collection of this wealth, because that's what a bank does. It gathers wealth. So this is all very, very good news. Now, I want to get into something else here today. I've been thinking about this, and I kind of thought it was time to touch on this subject. Before I do, again, for those of you that are new to our call, I strongly suggest you go to our call of December 1st to understand our program, to understand our trust package, and to understand why you need to establish this trust prior to the revaluation of the dinar. But the things I'm going to discuss now are relevant to all Americans, whether you have a trust or not, or whether you have currencies or not. And I want to discuss with you why it's important to establish trust to protect your wealth for yourself and your family. The protections that are afforded by trust, and particularly our trust package, are settled Western law. The establishment of trust to protect your wealth and your privacy go all the way back to the emperors of Rome. With all of their power, they still needed to establish trusts in order to protect their wealth. That transitioned to the royalty of Europe, who also established trusts to protect their wealth, because there was no guarantee that their position, whether high or low, would remain. Even though monarchs, emperors in Europe ruled by divine right. But something happened along the way. Individuals and lower rank nobles began to acquire, through their numbers, more power, and they started dismantling the feudal system. We had in 1215 signing of the Magna Carta, which basically limited the power of the monarch and increased the freedoms and liberties of lower nobility and the commoners. Even beneficiaries of land grants in the United States established trusts in order to protect their wealth from cheating, meaning returning back to the monarchy, which granted them those, which afforded them those land grants. Then in 1776, because remember, the trusts established in the New World were established prior to the Revolution and the creation of the 13-colony United States, or United Colonies of America. 1776, we had a revolution. It culminated in the foundation and the formation of 13-colony Confederation of Nations, and also, finally, the creation, about 8 years later, of our Constitution. Now, the United States was founded on an idea: sovereignty of the individual over sovereignty of the state, which is enshrined in the Constitution, and most particularly the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Sadly, as I speak, 235 years later, we are in an information civil war about what the United States' future direction will be. Will we retain sovereignty of the individual over the state, or will we succumb to sovereignty of the state over the individual? But there is a tool that we have available to us to protect our wealth, to protect our privacy, and hopefully to eliminate a lot of the tax liability that we're faced with. And that is the trust that we have created. It is true that this trust was created for denarians in order to protect the future wealth that will be established and created through the reinstitution and revaluation of these currencies. But there's a lot more going on than just that. because not all Americans have dinar, but all Americans do have some degree of wealth, and they want to protect it for themselves and their family. And this overlaps, most importantly, into the issue of currency. Now, I'm not going to get into the history of the central bank system, the fiat currencies, where we transitioned from a back currency to a fiat currency. Then we had the Bretton Woods. Then we had the transitions to full fiat in the 70s. I'm going to get into all those details. But what I do want to touch on is this. The creation of currency in the United States has basically been preempted by the Federal Reserve Bank. So let's start real quickly with the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin. And Section 10. No state shall make anything but gold or silver coin in tender in payments and debts. Now, this is important. What does this mean? It means that the Constitution says that the people can create their own currency through the federal government, and the states can transact in bullion, precious metals, not creating a paper currency, but they can transact with something other than the federal paper. Then in 1913, something happened. Passage of the 16th Amendment. Ratified by an Article 5 convention, it resulted in the creation of the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve. Now, we need to talk about these two things. First of all, the Federal Reserve is a misnomer. It's not federal. It's a private corporation. And there are no reserves. The Federal Reserve literally prints money in their basement, and they lend it to the federal government at interest. Now, why was this established? When Woodrow Wilson took power, and he was a progressive, and he was a Keynesian, even before Keynes, they wanted to grow the federal government, but they needed the money to do it. The money that the government received through bonds and through tariffs were not sufficient for what they needed. So they needed basically a printing press. They created it with the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve prints the money and lends it to the Congress. The Congress has to pay that money back. So how do they do it? They decide to create a federal income tax. Now, just to show you how bad things have gotten, when the federal income tax was initially established, and this is the lie that they told in order to get the Article 5 convention through and passage of the 16th Amendment, the federal income tax was a 7% tax on your income above $500,000. At the time, there was literally only a couple of thousand people in the United States that made that kind of money, and many of them literally left the country and said, this is the beginning of the end. Well, let's talk about what the Federal Reserve has done over the last 100 years. What was the task of the Federal Reserve? To control inflation and to keep unemployment low. Well, in the last 100 years, we've had at least one major depression, 8 recessions, and 2 very, very deep recessions. So the Federal Reserve has failed there. The result is we now have nearly $30 trillion in debt. They failed there. But the ultimate problem with the Federal Reserve is their ultimate failure, and that is inflation. Inflation is not the increase in the intrinsic value of anything. It's the reduction in purchasing power. So when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, if you went back 100 years to 1813 and calculated how many goods and services you could purchase for $100, 100 years later in 1913, you could purchase the exact same amount of goods and services for $100. That means there was zero inflation and zero loss of purchasing power in the United States for 100 years. So now it's 1913, we move to 2013. How much would those goods and services that we paid $100 for in 1913 cost us today? $2,100. That's 2,000% inflation from an agency that was created to control inflation. Now, why do I discuss all of this? The reason I'm bringing this up is because it's time for us to turn the page and take a look at what we're going to be dealing with when these currencies revalue. This is going to be the creation of a lot of wealth, a lot of currency, which means the value of the currency is going to be declining and there will be inflation. So what do we need to do? We need, number one, to make sure our trust is in force. We need to compel the IRS to confirm the tax deferral of the profit from this exchange because our currencies are held by our trust. We then need to take those dollars, which we will get at the point of exchange, and transition them into tangible assets to avoid the volatility that will be inherent with the increased money supply. So these are the things that we're going to be dealing with when this exchange occurs. I continue to hope that the exchange will happen next year, hopefully in January. But again, we do not want to see this revaluation occur in the last month, particularly the last month of the year, with the tax implications and hamstringing us into having to do sufficient exchange to pay the tax. And incidentally, we'd be forced to pay the ordinary income tax, even though 980.82 says it would be a capital gain, because if the IRS decides to, on a post facto basis, reinterpret that statute, we're looking at a 100% penalty. So we'd end up having to pay the ordinary income tax and then file for immediate refund, citing 988E2, and in case of those of us that have a trust, 643B. I know this is a little bit complicated, and I'm sorry to be throwing all of this out to you, but this is very important. Now, I'm going to be leaving this call. Again, those of you that I have not contacted, that have contacted me, and there's about a dozen or so of you, I've been trying to go back and forth with my calls. You will be hearing from me just as soon as I possibly can, but I need to get into some of these other calls. And frankly, what most of these other calls are debunking a lot of the things the quote-unquote gurus are saying about an imminent revaluation and the banks are preparing. If that is happening, I have talked to everyone I can get my hands on, and I talked to some pretty important people. I can't find a single person that has said to me, yep, I did my exchange. And I talked to a lot of people. So I do not believe that any of the tiers are exchanging. I'm not saying that there aren't some VIPs that have worked themselves some kind of a deal, because that always seems to be the case. But I'm talking about the announcement of a reinstitution in country in Iraq and the revaluation and placement on the Forex. I've seen none of that. So that's where we are right now. I apologize we're not doing a full call today. Again, I refer you to our call of December 1st. For those of you that like to listen to the replay, you can go to trustswithunlimitedllc.com. Our email address is trustswithunlimitedllc@gmail.com. And just let's hope that this finally is our time. This thing can be over and we can devote all of our calls to the management and funding of our trusts, to tax strategies, to reinvestment, to transitions to tangible assets, to funding our trust packages with the assets that we choose to keep and the assets that we will purchase after the revaluation. I've enjoyed our time together. It's been over a decade now, and it looks like, hopefully, we'll be moving on down the road and involved in some really exciting things for ourselves and our family. Now, our next call will be scheduled for next Wednesday. Certainly, if something of a dramatic nature were to happen between now and then, we'll try to schedule an emergency conference call and get out an emergency email. But failing that, we will be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so much for listening to the call, everybody. And again, those of you calling in for the first time, please contact us to get our no-obligation package. We'll be happy to get that out to you as soon as possible. Take care and have a great week. Bye-bye, everyone.